But today, some of the tools and resources I wanted to make sure that members are very aware of and know how to find them. If you go to the NACVA website, you go under association, you can go underneath professional standards. That'll take you directly to this screen here. And then on the left side pane, you'll be able to see the standards FAQ library, international glossary of business valuation terms, pretty well anything that you need. There's also a business valuation tool packet. Make sure that you're very familiar with where to find that information. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, that standards valuation resource toolkit that I was just describing, there's multiple items that you can download in a zip. There's a development checklist to make sure that your business valuation appraisals are meeting the relevant standards. No matter if you're doing a calculation or a conclusion of value, you cannot circumvent the development standards. This has that checklist in there. It also has some really unique stuff that are for more practice management, like engagement letters, for either litigation or for a calculation or for evaluation. So I'd recommend checking that out. That link is also there if you wanted to find a direct hot link to it. Standards comparison chart. There are two. There's a domestic standards comparison chart. It's about 14 pages. There's also an international standards comparison chart. It's a beautiful document, well orchestrated, thought up by one of our own, past president, Zachary Mears. On the left-hand side, when you open it up, this is just a screenshot. This left-hand side is the NACVA standards. I just happen to highlight in here under scope of services, and you'll be able to see the applicability standards, valuation services, and what they mean. And then USPAP. I know Chris Mercer was talking about USPAP earlier. I know he's an ASA. And you can compare any of these relevant USPAP standards or NACFA standards to any of these domestic VPOs, valuation professional organizations. And you'll see you have USPAP, ASA, and AICPA. They're broken down. The SSVS section 100 is broken down into two sections, bifurcated into calculations and then valuations. And there's slight nuances in there. So I definitely urge you to use this document. And it details, like I said, every VPO that's out there right now that's in a credentialing body. And it's kind of used as like a maze document, so you can help work your way through it. So for a lot of my work is also in litigation. You can use this document to help you navigate somebody else's work. If you see something that you feel isn't right, you can hone in on that section, find out where you believe there could be discrepancies that falls into the NACVA, and then go and cross-reference where that section is for that specific VPO that they have a credential for, and you can drill down and see if there is something that's actually missing that might have been overlooked. Here's a case example. I actually had a case, it's middle last year, so it's about 8 months ago. And in reviewing it, what had happened is I did a full conclusion of value, came up with an opinion. I had a 80, 100-page report that was written, very detailed. And about 8 months later, this was probably a few weeks ago, I get a review report from counsel. And counsel provides me with a review report. I'm very anxious. I love getting review reports, seeing what other people have to say. And I start highlighting the things that are in that review report. And some of the first things I look at is who is the professional that's reviewing my work? What are their credentials? In this specific case, they were a CVA and they were an AICPA member. They reviewed my work, and then they also provided an opinion. So there are things in the standards comparison chart that talk about all of the NACVA standards, which would include not only the development standards, but the reporting standards. And it also has, of course, the reporting standards for NACVA members and AICPA members as well. And since this was in a litigation context being disputed, I knew that there was a reporting provision, so they didn't have to necessarily comply with that. But here's a sample chart I would put together in an instance like this, where if I saw something that just didn't feel right, or I was making notes within there, I could go and I would reference, well, what section in the NACVA standard was I having a problem with? Well, in the review, they didn't actually express a conclusion or a calculation of value. They stipulated what a number was, but they did not include in the report if it was a conclusion of value or a calculation of value. So I was able to say, I knew that was an issue. I flagged where it wasn't MACVA, and since I knew that they were a CPA active, they have to follow the SSVS section 100. Didn't know if it was a calculation or a conclusion, but at least notated what sections to go look at. And I would do this for any issue that I have, using this as kind of my maze document. This is my skeleton document. If I were to write a report, or if I were to assist counsel in cross-examination questions, just to uncover what was really done, this is a framework that I would use to be able to do that. Been very successful with it. As I mentioned, there's also an international standards comparison chart with the relevant VPOs here at the top, the IVA-SC, you have Rick's Red Book, and then you have the CBB Institute here. And if you want to be able to find either of these, at the bottom, there's also this link. And I know there's a little note here that basically just says, these charts are designed to be a cross-reference tool. They're not necessarily authoritative, but this is pulled from the relevant VPO sections, pretty well verbatim. So there's really not a lot of interpretation. So I definitely recommend looking at those. There's also FAQs, frequently asked questions. These have been split into litigation and non-litigation questions. So no matter if you're doing strictly litigation or non or a blend, I think a lot of these questions would clear up a lot of issues as well. You can submit questions to the standards board, which we'll get into a little bit later. Some of those questions are used in developing FAQs, but your information, your personal information is not disclosed. You don't have to worry about that. These are just, regular questions from related issues around the world that people have that are NACVA members about how and when to apply certain standards. It's non-adherent, it's non-authoritative. It's an interpretive guide containing within the FAQs. It in and of itself is not really authoritative. Let's get into one of them that I saw as I was just perusing and preparing for this presentation. In a litigation setting, does it matter? Does a member's election to perform a calculation provide a safe harbor, allowing a member not to take responsibility for the appropriateness of the agreed approaches, methods, and selected procedures or use of professional judgment? The answer is no. No safe harbor exists that would allow a member to ignore professional judgment or disregard approaches or methods outside of the agreed approaches, methods, and selected procedures that best indicate a value. And there's also an interpretation down here that drills down even a little bit further. So this is a litigation specific question. Members who are in a litigation context, like I said, I am as well. We frequently do encounter members who will push the brink on a calculation of value. And you might see things like professional judgment being lacking, which is a little hard to defend. But you also understand, by using that comparison chart, looking at other people's standards, understanding the NACVA's professional standards, you're still held accountable to those development standards. So you can use that development checklist that we talked about earlier, making sure that those specific items were at least met. There's also these non-litigation questions here as well. Is it acceptable for a member to utilize valuation approaches and or methods that have not been peer reviewed? And if a valuation approach, the answer to that, if a valuation approach and or method is utilized by a member that has not been peer reviewed, it should be presented in a way that the reviewer can replicate the approach and or method. However, if the method can be replicated, it is not guaranteed to be an acceptable method. So these are, and there's an interpretation here as well that also drills down. These are really good FAQs. I know it's not picking on Chris. Chris is a great man. I know he's a part of ASA. They're, he's following USPAP. Like many of our members currently do follow USPAP. I happen to just bring this up because I know there is an FAQ about do NACVA members have to follow USPAP? And the short of that is no, you have to follow, if you're an NACVA member, you follow NACVA professional standards. If you're also a member of any other VPO, you follow those professional standards. And if you're in a litigation setting, your local state regulations trump all VPOs first, and then you would default back to your NACVA or your other relevant VPOs. There's the standards FAQ hotline that I was just briefly talking about earlier. as I said, your name will not appear in the standards FAQ library. So if you issue a question, this comes directly to the standards board members, and we address it immediately. It's sent out to all members. There is no camps of just litigation, just non-litigation. There are a blend of members in our standards board who have litigation and non-litigation experience, but it comes directly to the entire board, and we try to assist any member who has any questions. I would say if you, when you believe you do have a question, make sure that you've at least reviewed the NACBA professional standards. Most times when we see a question coming through, those questions 80% of the time are already being addressed in the professional standards. You can also check the comparison chart that we just talked about as well. A lot of the times those issues are there as well, like do you have to follow USPAP if you're an NACBA member? And then also, you know, if it's a last resort, you're not getting the questions that you want to, absolutely. You know, you can click this link, you can follow it on the NACBA website. Make sure to send us any questions that you may have. You know, this, like I was alluding to earlier, this hotline, you know, it's comprised of really highly experienced members. A lot of these members are not only active standards board members, a lot of them are, you know, past presidents, been with the NACBA for 20, 30 years, so who still have an affiliation with the board, so we can handle them, make sure that you're getting the best answers out there. You know, it should not be used to answer 90% plus questions the NACBA members might pose, but it will address those ones, like I said, are really hard to interpret questions, and we're really here to help in any way we can. As many of you know, I know this isn't a current standards resource tool, but many of you should be aware that the business valuation glossary has been updated. It was recently updated in, I believe, January of 2019, intended to supersede and replace the 2001 edition. It's not intended for the glossary to be authoritative, rather a helpful tool. And the key word is harmonization. So we don't believe that they were issuing this for there to be one set of glossary that everyone has to use. It's really just to show that, you know, everyone is pretty well using the same glossary with intended meaning and definitions behind them. But still, definitely take a look. If you are still referencing the International Glossary of Business Valuation terms in your report, definitely be aware that they've updated that since 2001. And it's extremely important if you're in a litigation setting and you have this in your report and you have not looked at the updated glossary, that can cause you some severe pains. So make sure to put eyes on it. I know even in my report, since we haven't came out being the NACBA yet and fully adopted the new glossary, I've updated mine to just saying that I am using the NACBA's glossary, and I provide links and resources to that. But there's now over 200 total definitions, over 105 updates, 48 brand new terms. So definitely look at it and put eyes on it. Make sure that if you're going to use those terms, you understand what they are and what those updates are. And just closing out, the NACBA did talk about the updates to the business valuation glossary. You can find where that specific update is by following that chart. And that's all I have. Thank you so much for having me.